Video, I'm going to show you how to make this super cute, super snuggly infinity scarf from Shannon Fabrics. What you need is 18.5 inches of this super wonderful, gorgeous, cuddly fleece. And also you will need a size 90/14 needle. Because this is a slightly stretched fabric, you need something that's quite chunky. And I'm also going to be using these wonder clips. It just makes it so much easier to sew rather than using pens. Take our piece of fabric and fold it right sides together so the long edges are together. And I'm going to use the wonder clips just to keep it steady. This fabric does have a tendency to move a little because it's quite a deep pile on there. Okay, to the sewing machine. I've set my stitch length to about 3.5. Because it's a thick fabric, you don't need to do a very small stitch, and it also helps to feed through the machine on the slightly longer stitch length. We're using a walking foot. Again, that just helps feed the fabric through because it's slightly bulky. And this pattern calls for a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So what I've done here is I've moved the needle to the far left position, and then I'm going to use the 1/4 inch mark on the walking foot as my guide on the edge of the fabric. First of all, we've got to remember to backstitch at the start and end. Very important, because we don't want that coming apart when we turn the scarf in the right way. So I'll do a couple of stitches forward, move that out of the way, and then I'll go back to the beginning, and then we will continue sewing. So as we can see here, we've got a little bit of excess fabric, and all I'm going to do is simply trim that off using the rotary cutter. Now we need to turn our infinity scarf in the right way, and oh my goodness, that feels delicious. Find the seam, which is just here. Lovely with this fabric that it actually almost disappears, you can hardly see it, but there it is on that side. And what we're going to do is we're going to put our hand on one end and flip the other end over. So we have a seam here and the seam here. And then we're going to turn right sides together again so that we can join it in the middle. We have to make sure that this twist stays in the middle though, and what you'll end up with when you have turned it in is a seam on one side, and on the other half the seam on the other side. So to do that, we're going to very gently turn it in that way. Like this. And we can give it a bit of a shake, like that. And here we have the same on that side, and on this end the seam is on that side. So I'm going to just give it another shake, get the ends together, and use some more of these clips to clip it together before we sew it. We're not going to sew all the way around, we're going to leave a small gap so that we have got a hole to turn it through. Okay. For this stage I've removed the extension table, and that gives me room underneath for this to pass round smoothly. And again, don't forget to fix your ends of stitching by going forwards and backwards a little. We have a 3/4 of a centimetre seam allowance, so let's just move all that out of the way. Okay. Now I'm actually going to move these clips before I get too close, because I want to make sure that I've got the edges together, because they still slip even with the clips, it still slips. So a little bit forward, a little bit back, and then go forward, keeping the ends nicely together. Now I'm going to try and stitch that seam open as well. Okay, and don't forget not to stitch entirely around and to leave a small gap there. So the next stage is to turn it right sides together, right sides out, using this very small space here. It's going to be a little bit of a fiddly job, but we will get there. And I always find this part very satisfying, because this is when you see exactly what you've created. And there is our lovely Minky infinity scarf. We just need to hand stitch that little gap closed. Now we need to just sew that little gap closed, and to do this I'm using the same thread that I used to stitch it together, in a double thread though, for strength. Just make a little knot at the end. This is how I do it. There's various other ways of doing it, but that's my method. So here's our hole, and we're going to pop the thread up through the seam, just a little way back from where we fixed the ends of our seam, and then we're going to do what's called a ladder stitch. So we go down on one side of the fabric. It's really hard to see this, I think, because it's such a nice fluffy fabric. And then we're going to go directly across onto the other end of the fabric. And just take a small amount and then come back across here. I think this one's going to be easier if I actually have the edge of the fabric out, because then I can actually see where the edge of the fabric is. And you want to do your stitch about 3/8 of an inch in from the edge of the fabric, just like the seam that you sewed. And if you just keep sewing from one side to the other in this manner, you don't have to pull the thread tight at this stage. We can do that right at the end. And this is a really good stitch to learn for closing up linings and what have you, and bags and coats and pretty much anything else that needs a lining actually. And when we pull it tight, as you can see here, it just disappears into the fabric and you can't see where that seam is. So here is our beautiful finished scarf, and you cannot actually see where the start and the end of this is, hence it's an infinity. But with this Minky, it's amazing. It's so forgiving if your seam line is slightly wonky. We all do it now and again. So forgiving, it's absolutely gorgeous. So here we are with our lovely Minky infinity scarf.